Between 1970 and 2010, gay men were hunted, brutally attacked, and in some cases thrown to their deaths from the cliffs of cruising spots above the beautiful beaches of Sydney, Australia. Many of these murders remain unsolved to this day. Thanks for joining me for Bashed. In the 1980s and 1990s particularly, there were several gangs across Sydney, Australia, and unlike other gangs, they were not territorial. Anyone was welcome to bash a fag. The Alexandria Eight was a group of young teenage boys, anywhere between the ages of 12 and 17 years old, who banded together to bash or assault gays and transgendered people. It was considered a game, a rite of passage, a blood sport. In 1990, Richard Johnson, who frequented a public lavatory in Sydney's Alexandria Park, wrote his phone number on a wall looking for sex. Someone from the Alexandria gang picked his number among the others and called him. And at the appointed time, Johnson drove up and walked into the bathroom. The company he found waiting for him was a group of teens who proceeded to beat him so viciously his spleen exploded. This and his other injuries led to his death. Soon after the murder, the teens began bragging about beating a fag to death, and a number of them were arrested, jailed, and convicted. In jail, a detective arranged to have their boastful conversations recorded. Several of the young men bragged about bashing a poofter, a gay slur, on and around the North Beach cliffs of Sydney, boasting that they had pushed or forced several gay men over the cliff edges. Now, if you're expecting me to tell you that the police took affirmative action with this information, prepare yourself to be disappointed. Well, that's not entirely true. Homicide detective Steve McCann, who had secretly recorded the jailhouse conversations, carried on an investigation, but he was a one-man team. McCann turned to his friend, lawyer and community liaison Sue Thompson, for help, but the two of them could only do so much. But through their investigation, they learned that poofter bashing was something of a widespread phenomenon. A gang of 20 to 30 teenage boys and girls, called the Bondi Boys, frequently engaged in gay bashing. This was just one of the groups that was routinely bashing gay men and transgendered folks. Once the jailhouse conversation tapes were circulated and the demands from the victims' families began to rise, inquests started to be held, and the police began to reconsider the nature of some of these deaths and disappearances. One of the families demanding answers was the family of John Russell. John Russell worked as a barman. He was found at the base of a cliff on the Bondi side of Marks Park, a popular gay sex cruising spot, on November 24th, 1989. Due to his high alcohol level, the police concluded Mr. Russell fell to his death, stating no suspicious circumstances were present. Later, in reviewing the case, Coroner Jacqueline Millage called the investigation lackluster, ruling Russell was thrown to his death by a person or persons unknown. Two of the reasons for this conclusion was the position of Mr. Russell's body. His head was facing the cliff, his feet pointing towards the ocean. The other was the distance from the cliff edge where Mr. Russell had landed, suggesting that he had been pushed or was launched off the cliff edge, as opposed to having jumped. When Russell's body was found, police recorded that he had blonde hairs in his hand. These hairs weren't collected, or they were lost, and his clothes were returned to his family, meaning all evidence was lost. Police now call Russell's death a probable gay hate crime. They announced a $100,000 reward for information in 2015, almost 26 years after the murder. Earlier on the night of his death, Russell had been out drinking with friends in Bondi, celebrating. The next morning, he would be leaving Sydney to start a new life in the Hunter Valley, where he was going to use some of his $100,000 inheritance to build himself a home on his father's property. In 1998, while out for a run, David McMahon was attacked near the road that linked to the cruising area where Russell had been thrown to his death. A group of teens asked McMahon for a cigarette, and he said they began to follow him, calling him names. Then suddenly they attacked him, kicking him, punching him. As they struggled with McMahon, one of the girls suggested that the boys shove a stick one of them was holding up McMahon's rectum, saying he'd probably like it. McMahon remembers one of them saying they should throw him off the cliff like they had done with the other dude. McMahon managed to escape, but as he ran, he said he was screaming for help, and a man appeared on his balcony and yelled back, "We don't help poofters." When he reported his terrifying encounter to the police, they put him in a holding cell where he overheard junior officers laughing and joking about what had happened to him. While we're talking about the police response, let's talk about a group or a gang of officers who called themselves the Hoodlum Squad, self-appointed vigilantes who would dole out justice to a wide assortment of criminals. They also had a predilection for gay bashing. In May of 1989, Alan Rosendale was brutally beaten by 4 men. He was visiting Moore Park, a gay cruising spot. Rosendale believes he was assaulted at the hands of the Hoodlum Squad. The night he was assaulted, there was a witness. Paul Symes had driven into the parking lot of the cruising area, and before he could park, he witnessed 4 men getting out of a car, handing out what he thought were wooden planks. Rosendale says, "I went over there to Moore Park, and I couldn't see anybody, and I thought, I'll just get out of here. Then I heard someone say, 'There's one, get him.' So I bolted. I was winning. I was getting away from them when I tripped and fell in the gutter. They proceeded to attack me with what I thought at the time were wooden planks." The next thing he remembers was waking up in St. Vincent's Hospital with a broken nose and several other injuries. Rosendale said, "The last thing I remember was seeing headlights coming towards me, and I thought, thank God I'm saved. Someone's here to stop it." The headlights were from Paul Symes' car. He saw what he thought was someone being killed. Symes said he turned on his high beams and drove toward the assault thinking it would stop them, but they didn't stop. Failing that, Symes wrote down the license plate of the car the men had gotten out of and went to the nearest police station. He says he was met with a lukewarm reception. He left the station and went back to the parking lot, fully expecting to see a dead man, but there was no one there. Rosendale had been found and taken to a hospital where he was treated for his injuries. He said he recalls hospital officials talking to the police, but the police never spoke to him. Paul Symes was contacted by the police soon after the assault and asked to come to the station and up to the office full of, as he says, men with gold on their uniforms. He was asked to confirm the license plate number he wrote down, and at one stage he was told that it was an unmarked police car, and the things that he thought were planks were in fact nightsticks or truncheons. Rosendale had been beaten nearly to death by police officers. Nothing ever came of the investigation, and the incident was quietly closed. I'm telling you about these surviving victims because it gives you a clear idea of the environment that queer folks had to live in. It also is a clear indication of the signal being sent to the bashers when the police are found to be a part of their number. Wollongong television newsreader Ross Warren vanished from Marks Park. He was last seen on a night out with friends on July 22, 1989. When Warren didn't return home, his partner Craig Ellis called the TV station only to learn that Warren hadn't shown up for work. Ellis says he knew that Warren might have gone to the Marks Park area and had been a victim of bashing. So he went to Marks Park, where he found Warren's car. Later, he returned with friends, and they found Warren's car keys on the rocks beneath the cliff on the Tamarama side of Marks Park. With all of this information, it took police 4 days to conclude that Warren had fallen accidentally into the sea. His body has never been recovered. It's important to note here that the police had no interest in investigating Warren's disappearance, even though they knew about all the other attacks in the same area. In 2005, Coroner Millage called the investigation into Warner's disappearance grossly inadequate and shameful. She further concluded that Warren had been murdered. The police now call it a probable hate crime. 10 years after the murder, police offered a $100,000 reward for information leading to Warren's killer or killers. One of the heartbreaking aspects of murder is the families left behind. Mr. Warren's mother, Kay Warren, wrote the police demanding, then begging, for action. It would take them 11 years before homicide detective Steve Page took up the investigation. While there had been people of interest in these cases, Coroner Millage found insufficient evidence to charge anyone with the murders. This pattern of no one being held responsible would soon change. It would only take 30 years. Scott Johnson was a 27-year-old American mathematician who had graduated from the University of Cambridge and had moved to Sydney in 1986 to be with his partner Michael Noon. He had applied for permanent residency and nearly had completed his Ph.D. at the Australian National University when, on December 10, 1988, his naked body was found at the foot of cliffs at Bluefish Point near Manly, New South Wales. His clothes were found folded neatly in a pile on the cliff above. His student ID, $10, and his watch were on top. Police labeled his death a suicide. Neither his boyfriend Michael Noon or Scott's brother Steve Johnson believe Johnson would have committed suicide. The tireless petitioning of the court by the family sparked two coroner's investigations, one in 2012 and one in 2015, both of which recommended that the police reopen the case. No action was taken until a third inquiry on 2017, where the coroner found that Mr. Johnson had been killed as a result of a gay hate crime. Up until this time, the police made regular statements that Mr. Johnson's manner of death was suicide. After a 30-year campaign and with an ever-increasing reward doubled by the family to $2 million Australian, a suspect was named. When in 2020, the ex-wife of 49-year-old Scott White came forward to report that her ex-husband had confessed to the murder of Scott Johnson. Initially, White claimed he was not guilty, but during the pre-trial hearing, White yelled out in the court that he was guilty, saying he wanted to cooperate. A New South Wales State Supreme Court judge accepted White's guilty plea, dismissing the objections from his lawyers. White was sentenced to a maximum of 12 years and 7 months, with a non-parole period of 8 years and 3 months. He will be eligible for parole in 2030. One of the things that came out in White's cooperation with the prosecution was his admission that he, for many years, was a closeted, frightened, angry man. A statement released by his family after the sentencing read, "When Scott Johnson's body smashed into the rocks, a life full of promise and exciting potential was tragically cut short, and his family lost a cherished member." I'm sure that all the families, or most of the families, of the murdered and disappeared men in this period feel exactly the same way. I'll post the link to the family statement and the press conference they held after the sentencing. It really is a lesson in grace. One of the things they offered is that they hope that the resolution of their brother's case will encourage police to continue to find resolution in some of the other 88 cases of dead and disappeared gay and transgendered people over the last 50 years. I have to confess to a few tears over this episode, having researched and written and read some of the very difficult things there are to read. I guess for me what makes me so emotional is the idea that there was a generation of Australian LGBTQ plus folks who viewed the threat of deadly violence as a part of life. It's just horrifying and revolting, and of course, heartbreaking. The other thing that I think about is how easy it is to blame the police, and believe me, they have some major blame to be apportioned to them for their inaction and their negligence in these cases. But here's the thing, police officers come out of our community. They reflect the community. Their attitudes reflect the attitudes of a society. I mean, after all, if the prejudices and bigotry didn't exist in Australia in this time period, the police would not have been able to get away with their neglect and, in some cases, violence. It's the strength of our powerful, positive attitudes or prejudices that create the environment that allows us to either thrive or perish. Please subscribe to the channel and like the video or podcast. I keep forgetting to mention the podcast. I'm waiting for the number of subscribers to grow a little more so that we can have a live chat about some of these topics. Thanks for joining me. See you next time.